Good afternoon and welcome to the European Development Days high-level panel, Empowering Women in Sustainable Investment and Business. I am Luis Tejada, CEO of the Agencia Española de Cooperación Internacional para el Desarrollo, AECID, and I will moderate this panel today on behalf of AECID, AFD, the French Agency for Development, KfW, I'm sure you know this German Bank for Development, CDP, the Cassa di Depositi from Italy, and other European development financial institutions. We have a framework of enhanced cooperation among these agencies, and of course we are inspired by a new European consensus for development and for also other texts as the EU Gender Action Plan 2. There is an increasing global recognition that investing in women's economic empowerment contributes to smart economies and reverses adverse gender dynamics. In line with today's discussion, I would like to highlight the fundamental need to join our efforts to boost the role of women in global and inclusive economic growth. Our key priorities are to ensure that a rights-based approach is employed in the empowerment of women and girls and to promote an enabling environment that allows an equal, fair and active participation in the economy. This session will focus on the role that women's entrepreneurship can play within the EU's new instrument for development assistance, the European External Investment Plan, as a key driver for innovation, growth and job creation. The plan aims at boosting sustainable investments and creating decent jobs in Africa and the European Neighbourhood, leveraging 11 times the EU's €4.1 billion commitment in order to make €44 billion available for investment by 2020. The plan is past its inception phase and is being rolled out as we speak. Today, we have a unique opportunity to learn about the latest development in the EIP implementation and discuss how this plan can mobilize and leverage public and private sector investments to deliver economic and social development with a particular focus on the empowering of women of all ages in sustainable investment and business. I am very happy to present our panelists today. Ms. Dorcas Apur is in the EDD 2018 is a young leader from Ghana, and she is Executive Director and founder of Advocacy for Social Inclusions in Girls' Education. Mrs. Elizabeth Egareva is Director for International Cooperation in the Ministry of Budget and National Planning in Nigeria. Mr. Ambroise Fayol is Vice President of the European Investment Bank. Dr. Kristalina Georgieva is the CEO of the World Bank. Dr. Anja Lachenbücher is Director for Europe and Middle East in the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Mrs. Betsy Nelson is Vice President of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Mrs. Beatriz Perez is Senior Vice President and Chief Public Affairs, Communications and Sustainability Officer in the Coca-Cola Company. And Mr. Peter Sands is Executive Director in the Global Fund based in Switzerland. We have organized the panel in the following order. First, we will have an opening address by Mr. Christian Danielsson, Director General for Neighbourhood and Enlargement Negotiations of the European Commission. Then I will ask each speaker to speak for 5 minutes on today's subject, and I will try that they share their experience, comment and engage in discussion with the public. We will try to gather some questions from the public and convey to them, but we must be, we have very clear in mind that we have little time, so I will insist a little bit to the speakers to be not too long. We have also a dedicated app that that allows posting your questions to panelists digitally through the iPad in my hands. And I will voice out some of the most interesting questions. Mr. Neven Mimica, Commissioner for International Cooperation and Development, will conclude the panel with closing remarks. Without further ado, I'm pleased to give the floor to DG Danielson. Mr. Danielson, what is new about the EIP, and why do you think it provides great opportunities for female entrepreneurship and employment, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa and the neighborhood?
Well, thank you. Yes, you can. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And I think this is a very, very important subject to be discussed here today. It's clear that financial inclusion and promotion of that is key for women empowerment. And that is about access to economic assets, that is about access to education, capacity building, recognition of the economy in a broad sense, including the care economy, and also the whole issue of digital connectivity. And at the same time, we know that the situation today is not very positive. We know that women remain half as likely as men to have full-wage jobs. We know also that there is a wage difference which is substantial. And we also know that there is a lack of opportunities for girls and for women, and that entails not only costs for them, but also for the economy as a whole. So it's clear that gender equality is therefore immensely important, just in order to see to that we get a better economic development. And in that context, I think we should see also the external investment plan. Although that is not primarily focused to address the issue of gender and gender equality, it has a substantive ingredients that, rightly used, will deliver on this, for this purpose. And I would like to underline that this is a new step, it's a new instrument, and we will have to really see to that it works, and therefore the panelists today and your comments will be most interesting in seeing to that we get it right and do it right. The idea behind it is that we should be able to not only use what we have used today, which is the grant funding from the European Union and the additional blending that comes in from financial institutions represented here, but also add on to that a guarantee facility which will make it possible to also tap the capital market and thereby get more of actual effect out of what we are doing. And when you look on the substance that is going to be addressed here, it is about agriculture, it is about energy, it is about smart cities, and it is about a number of other stuff, which all of them comes down to that it's something which provides an opportunity not only to get investments in those areas, but also to see to that women gets the possibility of more opportunities, more possibilities of get the necessary financing for projects that are underway and that have been thought out from their side. So I think this is what the new investment plan intends to deliver, and we have very high expectations on it, maybe too high. We hope that it's going to be an instrument that for the future will deliver better what we are doing. And as I said, I'm very interested to hear today what the panel's view is on this new instrument, how that can be used, and what they can use what they can do in order to see to that we get the utmost out of it. And with that, I think I hand over to the panel rather than continue to talk on this issue. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Danielson. I turn to Mrs. Georgieva. I would like you to comment which is the experience of the World Bank, which are the lessons learned. I know that you had a high-level panel with the Commission a very short time ago, 2 months, on on crowding in private investment. So what can you tell us about how these instruments can focus on women?
Well, thank you very much for having us all here. To the women in the audience and to the men in the audience, I have been waiting all my life for this to happen, for gender equality to become a very seriously addressed matter and to sit on panels where men are So, what have you learned in the World Bank that is relevant for the discussion today? We invest somewhere between $60 and $70 billion a year in public and private sector investments. And we recognize that this money is not going to go far enough unless it underpins the empowerment of women. Three very important lessons we have learned. One, action has to be evidence-based. And for this reason, we invest a lot of resources in knowing what the problems are, what the opportunities are, where they are. For example, we have a publication, Women, Business and the Law, and it tells us something very depressing. In 104 countries, there are legal obstacles to women to work in some or most professions. It also tells us that in 123 countries, there is no law protecting girls against sexual harassment and abuse in education. We also look at opportunities. We just, you heard, those of you who were in the previous session, you heard President Kagame and Amina Mohamed referring to a World Bank study in which we calculated how much we lose as wealth of our planet because of insufficient equality of women. And it is staggering, $160 trillion. We leave it on the table because women don't work fully or don't work at all, and because they are paid less than men. So we take analysis to then specifically inform the second lesson we learned. Knowledge is great, but only if you act upon it. So we massively invest in the health of girls and mothers, especially in reproductive health. We massively invest in education of girls, and in particular, pushing education of girls to go into skill areas that are traditionally boys' areas, like engineering, mathematics, heavy-duty agriculture. We do that. But then, and we just launched an incredibly good program that we are going to work together under the European Investment Plan. It has this great hashtagging thing, which is WeFi, Women Financial Initiative. $340 million from donors. We are going to turn this into at least 5 to 7 billion in investments in the hands of women entrepreneurs, small, medium, large businesses. The third lesson we learned, and that is, to me, the most important lesson. It is very good to invest directly in benefiting girls and women. But even most important, to have a gender lens on everything we do. So if we are building a rail in India, we ought to worry about the safety of women so they can actually have light at the station, women police to protect them, and even special compartments only for women so they can safely travel to school and to work. All of this experience, of course, came with many errors. We made the error to say, okay, let's have a gender box. So we check the box. We check the box, nothing happens. So we kind of abandoned the box checking. And the final message I have for all of us is, as institutions, it is also incredibly important to walk our own talk. We have to have parity in our ranks, and we at the bank, we are at senior management, we are now at 48%. We will be 50% soon. And it matters. I will finish with my personal shame on me story. All the way until I was 40, I didn't believe in advocating for gender equality, feminism, that's not for me. You are either good or not. And then I went to Vietnam, and a young woman there told me, pass a message to the president of the World Bank. Thank you for sending a woman as an example to our men. And I realized that in all my meetings, there were only women interpreters, not a single senior woman. So then I went back to the bank, and guess what? The pumpkin kind of turned into a princess. So all the power to women, all the power to us.
Well, thank you very much. It was very interesting. I think protective laws, education, the gender lens, and of course the example of the chairing position, the executive positions, are very, very important factors. I will turn now to Mrs. Elizabeth Egareva, Director for International Cooperation in the Ministry of Budget and National Planning in Nigeria. So the question is, first of all, do you think this EIP, this plan, is going to work in Nigeria? It has worked very well, something similar in Europe. It is going to work also in Africa, in Nigeria, precisely. And do you think that it will be a useful tool, this kind of thing, credits, to empower women as investors and business operators? What must we do within the plan to assure that the women are fully involved?
Thank you. Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I bring you greetings from the Honorable Minister of State, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, who was supposed to be here, but at last minute she had some other pressing engagements, and she had to ask me to come and represent her. In fact, I came from the airport not too long ago, and I'm struggling to stay awake, but honestly, I'm happy to be here. It's wonderful to be here discussing an issue that concerns us as women. You are wondering if the European External Investment Plan will work. Of course, it should work in Nigeria. In Nigeria, we have a lot of population, and so there are women in different categories. We have women who are doing well in their businesses and want to move their business forward and become major entrepreneurs. They want to be employers of labor. We have some women who are running small businesses and also want to take them to the next level. We have some women who are very poor and need the most basic of businesses to be able to even eke a living. So we have different ours is a unique situation. There are women in different strata of society, and I believe that if we link up with the programs that government is already doing to take care of the women at the various levels, link up with the private sector, we, at the end of the day, will be able to empower the women at the various levels. For me, I think it's not enough to just take care of the SMEs and also take care of the little businesses for women. It is high time we saw women who are employers of labor. It is high time we saw women who are at the topmost echelon of their careers. It is high time we saw women who are also partners in running the economies of nations. I think I would like to see that. And this plan will go a long way to achieve that. Thank you.
So, thank you very much. So, it's important not to restrict women to being employees or just small and medium companies or small enterprises undertakings, but also to be big employers and big executives, important executives, as you are. Thank you very much. I will turn now to Mr. Fayol, that can enlighten us about the policies of the European Investment Bank in gender equality, in the different activities the bank carries out.
Thank you very much, and a pleasure to be here with a lot of friends. I will start with a short anecdote. In Jordan, there is a businesswoman who is Amina. Amina has a business making oil and fragrances by pressing seeds, and she needed a loan to get a new machine. And we are financing a fund, the Badia Impact Fund, who is itself financing a financial intermediary who met with Amina. And when she was at the bank, Amina said, and I will quote because that's quite telling. Usually when you go to a bank in Jordan, they ask for the approval of your husband. In this case, they didn't even ask me if I was married. They looked at the business as a whole, at our cash flow, our invoices, and they gave me a loan according to that. They treated me like a human being. And I think this is what we aim at developing with the strategy that all the institutions are trying to develop. So we at EIB have developed a gender strategy. The Bank of the European Union is implementing that both inside and outside the European Union. It has three big characteristics. The first one is protect, the second one is impact, and the third one is invest. I'll start with protect, which is how do we include gender in the appraisal, in the due diligence of our projects. And that's what we have put as a key priority for the action plan that we have put in place. And for example, we try to develop projects where there is specific attention to female entrepreneurship. One good example is in Africa. Boost Africa has been set with the European Commission and with the African Development Bank. We aim at developing young entrepreneurship, in particular female entrepreneurship. And that's something that we do by investing in funds who themselves are going to invest in startups in Africa. As a European, I think it's also very important that we in Europe better convey the message that there is a lot of dynamism in Africa. And it's clearly the case also for the female business. That we need to understand in Europe that this dynamism is also an opportunity for us Europeans. Now, what we try to do, for example, is to identify in the environmental and the social due diligence what can be linked to gender issues. For example, can we push for, when there are issues related to opening bank accounts, that we only have joint bank accounts that are open to avoid the risk that the woman has no access to financial services. Impact, I think that's what Kristalina said. We need to identify opportunities, and clearly that's what we try to do. And invest, of course, because everything goes with investment. Now, we have not been the first to implement a gender strategy among our friends in the multilateral system. That gives us an opportunity to learn from the experiences of others. I think what is very important is that we do the exercise of best practices, of which kind of the lessons that we can share and we can draw from what we do in different geographies. That we develop the staff awareness and that we develop capacities. So that's what we try to do at EIB. And let me finish by, this is all the more important for the implementation of the EIP. EIB, as the Bank of the EU, is obviously very much involved in the EIP, in its design. I mean, there are banking aspects to the EIP that we attach great importance to, and we are actually very much involved in. There are the windows that are now being implemented, where we also have a key interest in continuing to delivering our role as a key partner to the external investment plan, in particular in its way to boosting gender equality and women's economic empowerment. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I will be happy now to take one comment or one question from the public. Anybody wants to intervene at this stage? Okay. Okay, so I think I will come back later. Perhaps you are more in, I mean, you desire more to intervene a little bit later on. So I will turn now to our young leader of today, Ms. Dokas Apur, who is the Executive Director and Founder of Advocacy for Social Inclusion and Girls' Education in Ghana. You bring ample energy and first-hand experience of empowering women in the economy. What is your experience? How would you see something like this, a big plan for financing businesses and also financial inclusion? How do you think this is going to benefit women? And what must the plan have in order to make sure that women are really the beneficiaries of this plan, that is not just a desire but a reality?
Okay. An investment of $1,000 allowed me to reach out to 219 women in Ghana today as I speak now. Growing up from poverty and losing 13 of my siblings, when I got to the university, it triggered me that I have to do something in my community to help women and girls suffering from extreme poverty. Working with women and girls over the past 4 years has been both empowering as well as challenging. And some of the experiences are having to negotiate with family members, especially husbands, to allow their wives to come out for training had been a serious issue in Bogatanga in the Upper East region of Ghana. But I have to put myself in their shoes as a young girl just to put a smile on the faces of women. And also having to teach women how to weave baskets, women who have never been to school, women who cannot read and write. It's a serious matter. And having to educate the physically challenged people, those who cannot sit, someone who cannot hear, but I have to put myself in their shoe and feel like I was them. Training them has been so inspiring. Just by all these challenges, we have our basket selling international markets. For example, our basket are sold in the UK, our basket are sold in the USA, and we have a market in Australia as I speak today. With seeing the EIP to be, I see the EIP more as a tool for empowering women than just for development. The EIP, which focus is an integrated for sustainable investment and also focus on an innovative and holistic complement, which focus is to eliminate extreme poverty. With the technical aspect, when women are equipped with the technical skills, like my organization that are equipping women with the skills in basket weaving so that they can survive the poverty level in the Upper East region of Ghana and Africa at large. When our investment is turned into skills weaving of basket and as well as accessibility to market, when the EIP gear its investment towards access to market for women entrepreneurs, we will achieve the results of our sustainable development goals. And the other aspect is that when the EIP is also invested, it focuses into, for instance, training, networking, and physical centers. And as I speak now, we are raising up a center to accommodate 5,000 women in the Upper East region of Ghana. Meanwhile, my vision is to reach out to 500,000 women in the next 10 years. So I can see the EIP can achieve its goal when it gears its investment towards the grassroots organization like mine. Because we are in a community, I understand how the community is. I grew up from poverty, so I know what to do and the kind of skills that to give to women to help them come out to support their children in the future. So the EIP can help us to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, if and only if it gears its investment towards local initiatives, that is, organizations like mine. Investing in women and girls is one of the surest ways towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Remember, every investment in the lives of women and girls counts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Apur. This idea of the grassroots organizations and as the best means to convey skills, and the fact that probably our credits must be twinned with this objective of reaching really these organizations that go directly to the communities is an important one that we should keep in mind in the future. I will now ask Dr. Anja Lachenbücher, who represents the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which you know has done some amazing work in development and health sector in particular, to address us and tell us which are the experiences of your work in women empowerment and how you envisage that this is going to benefit, or your experience is going to could benefit the big program we are launching, the EIP. Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, we're very excited about the EIP program, and we are very pleased that we will be actually co-funding together with the European Commission. We'll be spending 50 million in the health sector in Africa, which is matched by the Commission, and we're also spending another 12.5 million specifically on technical assistance, which we're very excited about. We're going to implement the project together with the European Investment Bank, and it is, as I said, in the health sector. It's about labs and diagnostic centers in low-income countries across Africa. And the diagnostics we're talking about are really, TB, malaria, HIV, and focused on women, maternal and child health diagnostics that are obviously badly needed. And we have a structure that's a combination of loans and guarantees. And obviously with that we're hoping to achieve what the EIP is trying to do, which is crowding in private sector capital into these areas. And it's interesting to see how much blended finance has grown in importance to achieve the SDGs. As a foundation, we do give mostly grants, so this is unusual for us. We have a fund of about 2 billion, which is called project-related investments, where we usually do equity investments or loan or structures like that, but the money all goes back to the foundation for further grants. And at the end of the day, in a structure like the EIP, I believe it is most important that if we want to have an efficient allocation for resources and capital, that each of the different financiers does what they do best. In a way, and there's a role for grants and there's a role for blended finance. I think for us, at the foundation, we're best at giving grants and taking risks and doing things that maybe other players are not so well equipped to do. And so with our participation, we hope very much that we can achieve maybe within the EIP also investments in social sectors, in sectors focused on women specifically, as we've heard throughout the panel already, which should be and must be a substantial part of the EIP. And, when preparing for this panel, I looked at some of these OECD numbers of private sector investments in Africa, and it is quite staggering that most of the money obviously goes to clearly cash-generating sectors, not surprisingly, such as banking, energy, industry. So it's interesting, I think, for us to learn how we can use some of these structures more consciously and more strategically for social sectors and also for interventions, such as specifically ones that are, health, agriculture, sanitation, financial services for the poor, nutrition, sectors where we do know it's much easier to reach out to women and actually bring them into sort of the active and sort of formal labor force. Because, we do know, and we've talked a lot as in former panels about human capital, those investments in health, in education, and these economic empowerment programs, so to say, are the ones that are incredibly important. And unless we focus on these human capital sectors, there will, of course, be sort of a cut to how far countries can grow. And we've heard from everyone, just before me, very humbling on this panel, how crucial it is to empower women and to bring them into the labor force and obviously address all of these millions of barriers that we still have. And one thing is also clear, that even if the success of a program and an important framework like the EIP is successful and we trigger economic growth, very often that growth isn't inclusive in the sense that it doesn't bring women and girls along in the same way, and they are not the beneficiaries from the positive effects. So economic empowerment programs, how we call them, access to agricultural services, financial inclusion, digital service, access to mobile banking, land rights, all of these programs that we do know have such a positive spillover effect are all things that I think the EIP, as we've heard, could do and address very consciously as they now roll out their plan. And of course, again, coming back to what I said earlier, some of these programs I think can only be addressed through grants and direct working with partners on the ground, and will be much harder to do through blended finance structures. But I do think there are simple things that can be done, financial institutions that cannot be discriminatory against lending to women, inserting the right policies with regards to land rights, mortgages, really concentrating on health and social infrastructure investments that we do know have disproportionate positive effects on empowering women. I think as the EIP now kind of, rolls out its plan and becomes more specific also what it requires, partially in terms of policy adjustments, I think there is really a lot that we can do to be very conscious on how we can make sure that women and girls that grow up in the countries that are the recipient countries for the EIP are just, freer of diseases, can enjoy a better education, and will at the end of the day be, have much more positive effects on their families and on all the communities that, so they live in. So I think there's a lot the EIP can do, and as I said, we're very excited to hopefully with our risk capital, that is specifically grant making, try to trigger in some of that financing that can be more directed towards those sectors.
Well, thank you very much. Well, now we will continue a little bit with the same area of work. We have Mr. Peter Sands of the Global Fund, who is the world's largest financer of anti-AIDS, TB, and malaria programs, with dozens of billions disbursed, and with a lot of experience in the e-health and health sector overall, but also in work with the private sector. So it will be very interesting for us to know which is your experience, and if you think that we are talking mainly of credits that are going to promote also some public policies. So what do you think that really the credits can be an instrument for promoting the position of women, the participation of women in the economy?
Thank you very much. And there comes a point when you're on a large panel where too many of the things you thought you were going to say have been said, so you have to think of other things to say. And I'm going to start from the slide that you can all see, the yellow slide up there, that talks about putting women at the forefront of sustainable development, protect, empower, and invest. And our starting point as the Global Fund is that if we want women to fulfill their potential, you have to start by protecting them, and protecting them from disease is a critical part of that. And the reality is we're not doing as good a job as we should be. Adolescent girls and young women are the principal people being infected by HIV/AIDS now. In the worst affected countries, they are 5 to 8 times more likely than young men of the same age to be infected by HIV. This is at one level a medical, clinical problem about transmission dynamics, therapies, and so on, but actually the root causes of this are huge gender inequalities. We're talking about sexual violence, we're talking about economic disempowerment, we're talking about educational disadvantage. And we have to get a grip on this. Demographics is going against us. There are a lot of very young people, both male and female, in Africa. If you look at the numbers of 5-year-old girls in Zambia, there are almost 50% more of them than there are 15-year-old girls. So if we don't make a massive dent in HIV infection rates, we are going to end up with more people being infected by AIDS rather than actually conquering the epidemic, which is the SDG 3 ambition, goal, and in a sense, my job objective. How do we do this? Well, we have to get out of our comfort zone as people in the global health arena in talking about public health measures and clinical therapies and things like this. And we have to work aggressively and imaginatively with partners. I'm glad to say, I think almost all the organizations along here, certainly the Nigerian government, certainly Coca-Cola. I'm not sure we do anything with the European Investment Bank, but certainly all the rest of you we work with. But I think we have to step up our game because the scale of this challenge threatens to kind of undermine a bunch of the other things we are doing to enable women to play their full role in economic and community and social development. And you just have to think of it in very simple terms. If you take a 15-year-old girl and you paint the scenario of what she can achieve and contribute, both in community terms, in terms of her personal family, in terms of economics, if she is educated, allowed to economically participate because of some things funded by the EIP or whatever, enabled to play a role in society. And then you paint another scenario in which she contracts HIV at that age. And actually there's two scenarios. One scenario is that she contracts HIV and we don't provide her with antiretroviral therapy. In that scenario, she gets ill and eventually dies. And that is a huge personal and tragic loss. It's a huge loss to society. And as an economist by training, it's a significant economic downside. But the other scenario is that we treat her. And that's a much better scenario and enables her to play a role in society and so on. But it's also, from society's point of view and from the individual's point of view, a very second best. It is pretty economically expensive to be putting somebody on antiretroviral therapy for the next 50, 60 years of their life. So what are we doing? We're doing a whole range of different types of intervention. And as I say, we are pushing the boundaries of what sort of health-based organizations are comfortable doing. One of the things we've done is we've launched an initiative with people like Coca-Cola, which we've dubbed the HIV Epidemic Response, HER. Working with Coca-Cola, Unilever, Standard Bank, and others, basically finding ways of trying to support, empower, influence, engage with, give voice to adolescent girls and young women to help them protect themselves. The other aspect, do I think we're doing enough? No, I don't think we're doing enough. We've got to do more of this, and we've got to engage. And so to the extent that these sorts of programs are helping engage the private sector more, we need the private sector to get engaged. We also need to tackle the men's side of the equation. These young women are getting infected by having sex with typically somewhat older men. And if we are not being as successful as we would like on intervening on the women's side of the equation, we are being even less successful on the men's side of the equation, and we need to step up our game. And again, we need to be partnering, I think, drawing in the private sector to help us there. There's lots of ways, you asked about e-health, there's lots of ways, technology. To start with, if you want to communicate with adolescents and you do it with your sort of classic public health notices, that ain't going to work. We're talking about engagement, social media, lots of different champions and voices to make things work. The other thing we need is really creative ways of using data to understand where our interventions are working and where they're not working. Because this is not a space where we have sort of 15 years of clinical trials that tell us what works really well. We've got to try things, we've got to learn from that, and we've got to improve and try them again. And again, that's a very technology-driven occupation. So I think that absolutely women and girls have to be at the forefront of sustainable development. We need to do a better job on protecting them early in their lives.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we continue with the private sector because now we have two participants who have a large experience in working with the private sector. First of all, we have the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Mrs. Betsy Nelson. The bank has a program that is called Women in Business, and it has been working for 5 years in 13 countries. And the bank, I think, has a large experience in the neighborhood and also in this South neighborhood that has some differences with the North neighborhood. I think that this experience is quite important, and I would like to see which has been the lessons learned and up to what point we could convey these lessons to the rest of Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to pick up Peter's 15-year-old girl and see what happens to her when she goes into private sector. The women in business segment is a huge, huge untapped market. Thanks to my colleagues next to me, IFC in this case, the research they've done has shown that the global financing gap is over 300 billion, and that around or more than 20% of women in business do not get formal finance where men do. It also shows that the average women's business tends to be smaller, less value added, and has less access to collateral. And it may be that they're smaller because they're not getting the financing. But we also know that women clients of banks are very loyal because the banks have come to their needs and allowed them to get the financing they want, and they repay. Now, for a risk officer, that's critical, but we think a lot of the private sector banks don't really get that yet. To have an impact on our economies, we have to unleash these women. We need to get them working, we need their businesses to grow, and that will fund not only the women, but it will benefit their families, their communities, and their countries. So this is much bigger than one woman and one loan. It grows into economic growth and economic empowerment for countries. So let me take a minute and talk about EBRD, so I put this in context. EBRD approaches most of its lending through private sector. We work loan by loan, and in the process of looking at each loan, we work towards building sustainable, open market economies in the countries we work in. We look at all our projects through the lens of 6 qualities. I added a new one. Competition, resilience, well-governed, integrated, green, and inclusive. And behind inclusive, we have an inclusion strategy and we have a gender strategy. And they're different. One looks at mainly the economic empowerment, and the gender looks at a slightly broader set of issues that are essential to engage with women in our countries. We know with fair and full access to opportunities, skills, finance, and services, women can unleash a huge amount of economic power and create for their countries sustainable economic platforms. But to do that, we believe we need to have in all of our countries sustainable banking systems that can fund these countries. We believe, well, we haven't done it, we've been around for 26 years, but that we should be in the country helping to build this, and then we should be able to leave. And for me, the success is when we're no longer needed. So I think for just a sense of how we build inclusion into what we do, for inclusion, we look on a horizontal basis. We look at different sectors, we look at the various countries, and we try to understand the gaps. We do a lot of work, and thanks to EU and support, we're able to look at training for young people and women, both in the cities and in rural areas. And we're able to help the businesses understand what their gaps are in terms of skill match and bring the two together, therefore creating a more powerful workforce. And in creating that and building inclusion, we again work towards that economic sustainability. The program that was referred to is our Women in Business program. We work in 18 countries from Morocco through to Kazakhstan. And since 2014, we've invested over 460 million euros in credit lines to over 30 partner financial institutions. And thank you again to the EU and a few others, we've had the benefit of 90 million euros of donor money that supported those programs. We look at the women-led businesses and the access they need to technical assistance, but also credit enhancements, which allow them to access finance in the banks. We also look at the women themselves and their businesses. We try to give access to know-how through either advisory work with consultants, but also through our own online training programs to build their understanding of how to build their business, financial knowledge, leadership, looking at how they can actually engage in terms of brand management, and even where they're ready for exporting. We have training workshops. We have environment where we invite people in and reach out to give network awareness raising. And we also work on, we have an online program that people can go in and self-diagnose their own management capabilities. So by using advisors, by using technical people and experts, we're able to take a small group of people at the bank and leverage it across a wider market. So far, we have reached, with this program, over 35,000 women who participated. We've had over 1,200 advisory contracts, and we've had over 5,000 training, women participate in training. And we've reached over 40,000 women in our general outreach through networking, through awareness building, and capacity work. So that's what we do, but how does EIP fit in with this? Clearly, in everything I've described, we have an underlying current of donor money and grant money. But we have a growing problem, which is how do you get banks to take risk? It's not giving them money, you have to get them comfortable with the risk. So we see EIP as a natural partner that will give us the ability to raise awareness because they have a much bigger platform, the ability to scale up our activities to have an impact that's much greater than we can. We already work through partner banks so that we can reach many more people than we could. But with the support of the EIP, we'll be able to scale that up even further. And thirdly, they'll be able to help us in policy reform in terms of regulation that will allow an underpinning for sustainability. They'll increase our opportunity to do work, our capacity to do work, and indeed, quite frankly, our impact. So let me try and give you a few examples of this. Some of the work that we do, we actually have to do research, and unlike World Bank Group, we get money from our donors to do it. It's not normally in our budgets. And so in Kazakhstan, we were working together with World Bank and the UN on their gender and family strategy for 2030, on gender aspects of it. And in that work, we did a bit of research where we were able to show the Kazakhs that they had over 400 jobs that women were precluded from participating in. These laws had been put in place many, many years ago, and they were put in place to protect the women. Going down a mine, working heavy equipment, was not something they could risk the mothers of their children with. But as technologies moved on, these gigantic lorries that move rocks around are very electronic. You don't need to be strong. In fact, you need attention to detail and you need to stay awake. So women have actually now been retrained and are actually doing these jobs. But the Kazakhs changed their laws. They've been working through, slowly changing, and so far they've opened up over 270 jobs now that women can participate in. And they're slowly working through the rest. We would expect and hope to see the rest being done in the next future. I'm not sure how quickly, but that's one example of how we can open up opportunities. Secondly, we really need to look at the sustainability of awareness and build a sustainable underpinning for businesses. So in Egypt, again with EU support, we are working on our Women in Business program, the normal one. What we've added with technical assistance money is to work with the MSM Development Agency, and therefore creating someone who can give that underlying support over time to the programs. And we're giving them technical support, and we're building capacity in their awareness of what these programs should be like. We also educate the banks. By default, as we work with the banks, we put platforms into their offices. We expect reporting back. We expect the discipline and the evidence that they do what they say and what we ask. So in the process, what we found is some of the banks that get it recognize that they need to change their products and they need to change how they operate. So we help them understand this so that they can tailor their products to women and indeed be in a position to help build their own platform. A study we did in Morocco showed that women in business, or women's businesses, represent 41% of the SME market. And that is essentially a 260 million euro loan demand. So a bank that gets it and builds its product is a first starter in a market, and guess what? They're going to be quite happy. So what we found in some of that work, and our economists did it as part of our inclusion transition report last year, is we weren't sure why banks were making the decisions they were making, because all their policies look right, they seem okay. And we talked to the Turks, and the Turkish banks, a few of them, agreed to work with us. And they gave us a group of lending officers, and we prepared cases where the companies were identical, but the name at the top was a male or a female. And they gave it to the loan officers to see what they would do. And when they finished, we took them back and we assessed all of the decision making. And interestingly, there wasn't that many women loans that were rejected. But the women were charged higher interest rates and expected to post more collateral. And when we showed the results to the banks, they were actually shocked. This belief that they had no bias at all came out, and there was a very large unconscious bias. And the result of this is they've changed their lending policies, and they've put unconscious bias training into their training for lending officers. So with more EIP money, we can do more experiments and hopefully train more people. And the last example I'll give you is what we're doing now in what we call SEMED, which is Southern Europe and Mediterranean region, where we're working on a financial inclusion program. And we have two sides to it. 5 years ago, we wouldn't have had the local authority side. But we've recognized that if we don't change the infrastructure in terms of legal reforms and in terms of capacity within the system, then we can't have sustainable change. So we're working to give technical assistance to the local authorities to help them look at their local regulations, at their legal frameworks, and indeed the institutional capacity. And at the same time, we're supporting women, but in this case, we're looking at women who are first-time borrowers and who live in more rural areas. And to support that, we're doing a first risk loss participation on the portfolio. In fact, we're sharing the risk. We did a transaction in Albania where we put a portfolio risk share in place for agribusiness. And when we went and had I had my first meeting with them, and we were going through the program, they thought that we were too tough on structure. But what we found out, we thought that we were opening doors to poor women. But what we found is their loan policies were so strict on collateral, and the women didn't have collateral. So they had very good cash flow businesses, but they didn't have sufficient collateral. And the guarantee allowed them to get a loan because the bank could override its own policy with the guarantee. And they told us that after a couple of years of this, if the loans are performing, they will then go back with evidence to change their loan policies, and therefore will have, hopefully, a market where we won't be needed. So for us, it's a combination of investing, it's bringing to that investment institutional capacity building, and it's policy to create an enabling environment that's sustainable. And that's how we're going to use EIP on a much bigger scale. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting, especially thanks to the practical experience that you have, and there are many, many good examples you have given to us. I think that now we are going to hear also a specialist in the private sector. And I think this because many of us today are civil servants or public servants, but it's very, I think it would be very, very interesting to hear you, Mrs. Beatriz Perez from Coca-Cola, and tell us, you have this program 5 by 20, but also I imagine that you have other actions. So please.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for having Coca-Cola here on this panel of distinguished participants, many of our partners as well with the Global Fund, Bill and Melinda Gates, across Europe, across Africa. We're quite honored to be here. Coca-Cola has always believed in the power of women, and I'll give one core fact, which is something that not everyone really knows, but in the United States, Coca-Cola was the first corporation in 1934 to appoint a female to its board of directors. It was in 1934, Letty Pate Whitehead Evans. And why did our founders do that? Robert Woodruff did that as the chairman of the board because he said we need to have a woman's perspective because they're 70% of our purchases and they're the ones who are going to even make us more successful in the future. And so it was a business decision to have a woman appointed to our board of directors. And even today we have 4 women on our board and the number continues to grow within our ranks. So it's always been important to us. We've existed for over 90 years on the continent of Africa. And you mentioned the 5x20 program. Let me link it to EIP. There's 3 really critical pillars to EIP. It's the financing that we've heard here, it's the tools, and it's also the partnerships. And we're proud to be one of those companies that is willing and able to partner using our resources and to build these relationships. Back in 2010, when we set the goal to empower 5 million women by 2020, it was to economically empower them. Today, we've reached over 2.4 million women in over 75 countries. Over 1 million of those women are on the continent of Africa. And we are very proud to be able to quote those statistics. We have our data assured through third parties or accounting firms because we want to make sure that it's not just Coca-Cola saying we've empowered these women, but that the women will continue to thrive. And actually, Peter, you said something in your comments. You said we have to teach women to protect themselves. We also want to enable women to be successful so they can make sure that as they're learning the tools and the training that they can continue to thrive with or without companies or the partnerships in the future, and to do even more for themselves. I just want to share 2 small quick examples, and I know it's hot in here, so I will wrap up quickly so we can get to the audience. But we put together 5x20 in terms of how do we also educate, how do we train, build business skills. We found that when we did research within South Africa, we did research with an organization named Ipsos. We found that simply teaching women about bookkeeping, how to pay themselves a salary. Many were running businesses not paying themselves a salary. That we found that they were able to actually even display the merchandise in their stores in a little bit more organized way. They increased their income over by 46%. Imagine how much money that is to that woman who now, by simply learning how to do better bookkeeping and to display her store, was able to increase her own income. And that will continue to stay with her again and again and carry through the generations. Or if she were going to go on holiday or needed to go somewhere else, who was going to manage her business? Very simple little details like that that were critical. The other story that I want to share is, if you allow me, Elizabeth, in Nigeria. There's a program that we did in Nigeria around young women and girls called Educating Nigerian Girls for New Enterprises. ENGINE is what we call it for short. And it was, how do we teach young women and young girls how to make sure that they understand that they have these opportunities ahead of themselves. The more educated they are, the more opportunities they'll have to either go into business, run their enterprises. What we found that we were able to touch over 21,000 Nigerian girls through this program. Over 55% of them today have started their own businesses or are managing some sort of enterprise. And over 10,000 of them that are not in school have already found jobs. And so the results are really critical to also measure and track, because what we found is that when we set these goals and we build the programs, that if we're not measuring and tracking and publicly disclosing them, then it's easy to talk about it, but we don't really know if the actions are working or not, and how can we improve upon the actions, and how do we go even further and better. And I'll just close by saying one comment that I learned from a lady named Miss Malejo that I met on the African continent, who was part of our 5x20 program. She reminded me that women want the tools and the training, not because they want people to feel sorry for them or because they want someone to give them handouts. It's because they want to thrive. And so Mrs. Malejo turned to us and she said, what we want is, we want not a handout, we want a hand up. And she put her hand up and she said, thank you for creating programs like this and for the partnerships that exist. They're able to give women like me a hand up to be able to contribute to her societies. And I'll never forget that conversation. I'll never forget hearing how inspiring she was. And today, since we talked about this earlier, she's also employing several other hundreds of women today across small businesses. And so I think that she's one positive example of someone who's been given a hand up and who continues to give back. So thank you, and thank you for allowing Coke to be a part of this.
Well, thank you very much. There are many things that have come up in our discussion. And of course, the importance of enabling conditions like the health of education, the precise relevance of skills, details like you have just quoted bookkeeping, for example, as simple as this, the importance also of changing the mentality so that they can jump to entrepreneurship. That is not obvious. You can have the education but not the spirit to create a company or a small enterprises. But of course, the importance of changing the laws, something as the capacity to drive a lorry or a truck or heavy machinery or other laws that prevent women from managing money or finances. And of course, the protection, protective laws against violence that are so important. Also that you have specific credit lines for women in business. That you apply the gender lens, the importance of leadership and the example of leadership, so that you, for example, can demand when you are going to give credits that there are women in the board of directors. And of course, managing data is not just you have to have an information on what is going on. This example of the discovery by a bank that they were charging higher interest rates to women without knowing beforehand. And the fact that we have to educate partner banks, we are going to convey a lot of money to big companies, private companies and partner banks. And if we are going to ask for some respect of quotas in women employment and of course women lending, I think that we could do a great service to women in general. This education of banks, I think, is an important part of, or could be an important part of our program. Also, to keep a close control of the evidence, to have evidence all the time, so that we know that we are in the right direction. I would stress the intervention by our young leader, very much focused on poorest women that are so difficult to reach, women that cannot read or write, and then you have to work with organizations as the one she directs, she leads, and also very much with the communities. And this means that we have also to be focused very much on poorest women, because with these instruments we have a tendency to work a lot in middle-income countries and middle-income women, but we should keep a very strong focus on the poor. Well, there are many interesting issues here, I think, for a certain public intervention by the people who are here among the public. And of course, this is the question, we should ring-fence some means within this big instrument for the women, perhaps yes, no? But could you react with something to say your comment? Probably you have experience of your own in your own day-to-day work. Many of you work in development organizations. What do you have to say? If not, of course I will come back to you again, but I would like the public to say something. Yes, please. Yes, by Mr. Micro. I have a couple of words already asked. It is there. It's coming. This lady here.
Katarina Maternava, I'm a Deputy Director General in DG Neighbourhood and Enlargement, spending a lot of my time, most of the days, on the EIP, and it's fantastic to see the partnerships that we will be able to have. And on the boards, congratulations. It has not been a linear development since then, certainly. I have the following question. I mean, we heard a lot, and we also intuitively know, thanks for the study of EBRD on the collateral requirements and rates, we all know about the obvious barriers to women's empowerment, women's participation, women's access to finance, etc., health, education, cultural impediments. Kristalina, you mentioned and reminded us of the importance of evidence, on the importance of acting on the evidence, not contrary to the evidence, and then you spoke about the gender lens. Can you please elaborate on some of the less obvious and give us some more examples, specifically on infrastructure? What it is that we should keep in mind when we are designing something, because everybody thinks, sure, we should have a separate program, women in business, but can you tell us something which is not obvious, obviously gender biased, and give us some more examples from your experience?
Please.
Well, one of the most profound examples is construction, whether it is road construction or it is dam construction, but big construction projects. What usually happens is you have risk of gender-based violence. You have risk of prostitution that surrounds big construction projects. And it is incredibly important to work with local community leaders, to work with women, and understand what may be a risk that the eye doesn't see. And what is it that you can do to protect girls and women against this risk? We have gone through a number of cases where we found out that if you were to be too intrusive and shout that women have to be protected, what may happen is that the women may become victims not of sexual violence, but of the accusation that they are on the way of construction to take place, that jobs are being lost because women are being seen as drag on the project. So this is something that you would not immediately identify as a problem, but then if you think through it, there are ways in which you can actually engage and counter without exposing women to be accused that they're on the way of progress, on the way of project. Another very kind of counterintuitive is we have gone into saying women should have bank accounts. Okay, so we create lots of bank accounts for women, except that they are dormant. We haven't thought first of what would be the source of money to get into this bank account. And then, yeah, they have bank accounts, makes no difference. So you have to first think, would this account be populated, and what you can do to get it populated. For example, in Bangladesh, we decided that we are going to work very actively to first make sure that companies, small, medium-sized, big, make salary payments into digital accounts, and only then go for financial inclusion, engage the financial institutions, so these bank accounts would mean something. It is full, I mean, life is full of stories in which if you jump your gun, you may actually harm participation of women or empowerment of women rather than help it. And if I may say one kind of final story of this, what do you learn when you actually do it? That bringing the men on board, as obvious it may be, is actually hugely important. We had a case when we did a program in which we would put money, cash in the hands of women. But we did it so clumsily that women would have cash only for a short period of time. It would be taken by their husband and, you know, squandered away. And on top of it, they may be beaten up. So always think through what you want to do and then how you're going to do it. So next time around, we actually work with the men first, and the men realize that it is in their interest that their women get the money. And then we had a little interview, and one of the men said, yes, initially I didn't like your idea, but if you gave me the money, I would buy a bicycle and my family would be hungry. So that in the short and the long is that engaging women requires engaging everybody. And men can be tremendous champions for women or not. And sometimes it is us, the so-called good wishers, that may be the cause of damage rather than of good.
Thank you very much. I think you would like to
I was just going to add one thing. I think when doing the consultation on these types of projects, particularly infrastructure, you've got to get, we found if we send a woman on the team that's doing the canvassing of the community and everything, and that rather than get all the women together while the men are off working, they go home by home. They get access to the women and they actually start understanding what the women's issues are. Secondly is making sure, particularly municipal services or where a road's going to be cut off during the day at some time, the men are not at home, the women are going back and forth, markets, etc. So really trying to get their perspective of what's needed from municipal services, and also during the construction time, what things would be interruption. And I think I agree with my colleague, because I think if you try and get them all in a room, it's threatening to people. But we have found if you can go around to each home, it makes a difference.
Yep.
Thank you very much. I think somebody asked you was.
Does it work? Okay. My name is Gustavo Domato. I'm working at the Red Cross EU office here in Brussels. First of all, thank you very much to the whole panel. It really gave us the global idea of how, let's say, the whole EIP program is going to work. But it's very difficult for me to try to grasp in a very concrete way from a much more ground level point of view. Let's suppose if I am a woman in a village in Niger, trying to put together a cooperative in my village, how could I benefit from the external investment plan? When and what would be the steps that I would have to do? And if there is an answer for that, is that something to be regarded as an individual initiative, or is there any role for civil society organizations to participate into that? Thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, I think that we will have a short question, a short answer, because we have still the conclusions and the closing remarks by Her Excellency Neven Mimica, who is the Commissioner, and he's waiting to intervene. He can perhaps give us some clues about the EIP also. But if anybody here has the answer, I have the impression that we are a little bit too far ahead from knowing exactly which are the mechanisms, because the instrument is just starting.
The European Investment Plan is still young. What we are putting together, as some of us spoke, was a partnership that brings different organizations with different skills and capabilities. Most likely what the answer would be is that there would be a credit line through a local financial institution, may even be the local cell phone company, where that would be connected to a facility. There would be probably some technical assistance coming that would help her to do bookkeeping and figure out how best to use the money, and it would be associated with the European investment plan. And very likely there would be a community organization that is, you asked about civil society, that is being engaged locally to connect this community to the functioning of the plan. And the face of the organization may be the European EBRD, maybe EIB, maybe World Bank or IFC, maybe one of the, maybe the Gates Foundation. And that is the beauty of the European Investment Bank. It doesn't try to create a new structure with all its departments and bureaucracy, but it is building a strong partnership so we can blend different instruments, so the woman in Niger actually has a door to knock on. And frankly, I don't think she cares which of us is behind that door, as long as somebody is there.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask Commissioner to come up to the stage and close this meeting, please.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. So, Excellencies, distinguished guests, participants, colleagues, and partners, it only remains for me to thank all of you for the excellent work that you have carried out in this event today. The diversity of your backgrounds and experience shows that empowering women in sustainable investment and business is a priority for all of us across all sectors and societies. Today's discussion has confirmed that investing in women makes a clear business case, because it's not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do, economically and financially. The European Union is committed to this goal, and we are now even better equipped to do just that, with new tools like the European External Investment Plan. You have also discussed today how women's economic empowerment can concretely help to reduce poverty and increase sustainable development by creating innovation, jobs, and growth. For example, we heard that the World Bank estimates that the lost potential could be as much as $160 trillion in global wealth, or over $23,000 per person. How can any of us afford to ignore this potential? Especially when the costs of closing the labor force gap are just a fraction, less than a third, or no, that's less than a tenth, I would say. We support gender-friendly policies that, combined with the right regulatory and legislative environment, address the main barriers to women's economic empowerment and entrepreneurship through access to social networks, skills and training, financial and other resources. Tackling cultural and family norms is also essential to contribute to those objectives. Our 2014 policy framework on a stronger role of the private sector in sustainable development emphasizes the need to focus on female entrepreneurship and employment. For example, we have strengthened our support for the garment sector, whose global workforce is 75% female. We have a number of promising initiatives, including a €19 million action with the International Labour Organization to promote responsible value chains. And we are working with the International Trade Center to build a responsible fashion industry through talented artisans, the majority of them women. As you heard in today's introduction, one of the main aims of our new European External Investment Plan is to create jobs and opportunities for women and young people in particular. For example, the investment windows on small and medium enterprises and agriculture and rural development could play a particularly central role given the active involvement of women in these sectors. Another concrete example on how the EU can support women's economic empowerment is the utilise fund for sub-Saharan Africa. This uses partial risk cover to help provide access to finance for countries, sectors and groups of people who currently have little or none, including women and young people. Women often face reluctance from banks to lend to them. So the European Union is already providing partial risk cover to encourage local banks to develop specific products, training and advisory services for female entrepreneurs. These are the kind of activities that we want to replicate and expand. We are delighted at the initial interest for the new European Fund for Sustainable Development Guarantee. We have so far received around 50 high-quality and innovative proposals from more than a dozen partners for a total value of over 3.5 million euros, and 3.5 billion euros. And we really hope all of these will result in tangible benefits for women. Any partners in the room who want to be part of these exciting opportunities can get in touch with our dedicated team through the one-stop shop on the European External Investment Plan, which you can easily find online. Any interested investors can submit project proposals to the participating financial institutions or directly through the web portal. We want to focus on the sectors with the greatest potential to generate decent growth and jobs, and to encourage investment where it otherwise would not flow. When it comes to women and girls, we know that this is the smartest investment for individuals, communities, and our economies at large. So thank you once again for your participation, and I look forward to working together to increase our investment in women. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think we have come to the end of our meeting. Thank you very much. It has been very interesting, I think, of you.